Okay, so we have a bit more time because we've got a cool activity today that Katarina's got organised for us. So we'll get through the story and then we'll go and do the craft. It's a really good one. Even Jerusha will like it, won't you, Jerusha? I think so. All right, we're still in Genesis. We're looking at Joseph today. It's going to be the last patriarch we're going to look at. So we had Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Remember last week we looked at Jacob and Esau, and this week we're looking at Joseph, which is one of the 12 sons of Israel, or Jacob. And we're going to talk a little bit about his dreams. I got some pictures as well. Somebody's made some cartoons to go along with the story. So Joseph, this is Jacob here in the story. Jacob. And this is Joseph in the blue. And you know Joseph, of Jacob's 12 sons that he had, with many different women. He shouldn't have had different wives, but he did. He had 4 wives. His favorite one was who? Who do you think it was? Simon? Joseph. That's it. So he looks happy, doesn't he? Because he's the favorite one. What about his brothers? Do they look so happy? No, they weren't very happy that he was the favorite one. And because he was the favorite one from Jacob, you know what Jacob gave to Joseph? Oh, look at this! Coat of many colors. So as everyone knows, see how it's nice and rainbow? Oh, so fancy, isn't it? Look at them. They're not very happy, are they? They're like, why does he get the nice coat of many colors? You know, he's favored by Jacob. They didn't like Joseph very much because of that. You know, that's why sometimes parents shouldn't play favorites, because when they do, sometimes the siblings don't get along. Like here, not very happy, are they? He's getting favored. And Joseph is known for his dreams. He had wisdom from God where he would see dreams and he would know the meaning of the dream as well. So this is the wisdom that God had given Joseph. So he had a dream. I don't have a picture of the dream, but the first dream he had was him and his 12 brothers were out in the field gathering up the wheat, binding their sheaves. And he shares this dream with his brothers and says, you know what? We all had our sheaf of wheat, and your sheaves of wheat all bowed down to my sheaf of wheat. They were like, are you going to rule over us? They didn't really like that dream, did he? Saying, hey, you're dreaming where we're all going to bow down to you, especially when you're younger than us. Joseph was one of the younger brothers. Look here, Genesis 37:7. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, that's the wheat, and lo, look, my sheaf, so sheaf is a bunch of wheat, arose and also stood upright, and behold, your sheaves stood round about and made obeisance to my sheaf. So what is obeisance? It's when you bow down to the sheaf. So all their sheaves bowed down to his sheaf, and that was a picture of, one day you guys are all going to bow down to me. Well, they weren't very happy about that dream, were they? They already didn't like him because of this. And now he's having these dreams where he's saying, hey, you guys are going to one day bow down to me. They weren't happy about that either. And then he had another dream. Another dream where he says, hey, there was a moon and the sun and 11 stars. And they all bowed down to me. And then when he told his brethren that one, Genesis 37:9, he dreamed yet another dream and told it his brethren and said, behold, I've dreamed a dream more. Another dream. And behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars. So what does this represent? This represents his dad, Jacob, his mum, the moon, and his 11 brothers. Stars made obeisance to me. So not only now is he saying, my 11 brothers are going to bow down to me one day, he says, my mum and dad as well is going to bow down to me. So they were saying, whoa, they thought about that and weren't too happy about that either. Oh, look at this dreamer. He's thinking he's such a hot shot. He's got his coat of many colors and his dreams, that we're going to bow down to him one day. So one day, Jacob tells Joseph to bring his brothers some things into the field. Right? So he says, hey, take this to your brothers. And they didn't like him very much, did they? So they see him coming afar off, and they're like, what are we going to do with this dreamer? So they decide, you know what, we're going to get him killed or something like that. So they don't decide to kill him. They say, hey, we're just going to put him in this pit, keep him there for a bit. See how they're saying? They throw him into this pit. And one of his brothers says, we shouldn't. He tried to save him. It's his older brother, one of the oldest brothers. And they said, you know what? If we just kill Joseph, then there's nothing to gain from that, these evil brothers. So they said, you know what? We're going to sell him to some merchants. So they sold Joseph into slavery into Egypt for 20 pieces of silver. That's what they did to their brother. Unfortunate. So Joseph went into Egypt, and he ended up working for a man called Potiphar in Egypt. And because Joseph was such a good worker, you know what Potiphar did? Potiphar made him basically the boss in his house to take care of everything. All right, so here he is. Now he's dressed up as an Egyptian. He's working in Potiphar's house. This is Potiphar. And now he's managing all the affairs of Potiphar because he was such a faithful worker. So if you work hard, people will put you in charge of things. But this is Potiphar's wife over here. Potiphar's wife saw Joseph, and she had some evil plans. She tried to get Joseph to sleep with her. Right? And when she's like, come, lie with me, Joseph, being a righteous man, said no, he didn't want anything to do with it. So one day, she tried to grab him to force him to sleep with her. And he fled. But when he fled, she got hold of his coat. And that's what was left behind. See this red coat here. And then when everyone was trying to ask what was going on, she's saying, Joseph actually came and tried to force me to sleep with her. So she lied to everybody. When it was the other way around, wasn't it? The other way around was Potiphar's wife was trying to get Joseph to sleep with her. But now she's telling everyone, Joseph tried to force me, and I have the evidence. See, his coat is here. So because of that false accusation, Potiphar, who was his boss, right, the owner of the house, got very angry with Joseph and threw Joseph into prison. Now in prison, what happened is Joseph met, I don't know which one's which, there's a butler and a baker that he was in, that the Pharaoh had got upset with and threw them into prison. So in the prison, the butler and the baker, they both have a dream, don't they? They have a dream, and then they tell it to Joseph, and then Joseph gives the interpretation of the dream. So the butler dreamed that he saw an olive tree with 3 branches, and he says to the butler, that dream means in 3 days you're going to come out of prison and you're going to serve Pharaoh again. But the baker was not so lucky. Baker had a dream where he had 3 baskets of bread on his head. And Joseph says to him, those 3 baskets mean in 3 days, you're going to die, right? He's going to hang you up. So 3 days later, that happens. The butler is, back to Pharaoh, serving Pharaoh, and he forgets that Joseph told him this dream. And the baker is put to death. Now one day, Pharaoh has a dream. So these are all the dreams. So remember, Joseph had a dream, the butler and baker had a dream, and Joseph's been able to tell them what it means. One day, Pharaoh has a dream. And Pharaoh dreams, there was these 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 fat cows that came up. But after it, you had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 skinny cows. And he says, you know what? In my dream, the skinny cows ate the fat cows. Oh, he didn't know what that meant, that dream. Then he has another dream. He's got a stalk of corn. He's got 7 ears of corn here. Nice and fresh and fat. And he says, and then another one came up. 7 lean, shriveled, and dying corn. And he says, those consumed the 7 fat pieces of corn. And he says, I don't know what this means. And he asks all his wise men, what did this dream mean? And none of them could tell it, because these guys were all fakes and phonies. But his butler now he remembers, well, in jail, I remember Joseph. I had a dream, and Joseph told me what the dream meant, and it happened. So he tells Pharaoh, let me go get Joseph. We'll tell him the dream, and maybe he can tell us what it means. Right? And Joseph tells him the story of this dream. What it means is there's going to be 7 years of great prosperity, a lot of wheat being grown and all that sort of stuff. We're going to have plenty of food. But then after those 7 years, there's going to be 7 years of famine where there's no food, and it's going to be very bad times. And he says the 2 dreams mean the same thing. It's just God has told you 2 times that this is going to happen. So what does Jacob say? Hey, you need to make sure that for 7 years we're collecting up food. So for the 7 years of famine, we have food for when the 7 years of famine come, we have enough food. And he says, you've got to put somebody over this business. And Pharaoh says, well, you've got the Spirit of God, you're wise, I'm going to put you over this business. So now Joseph, you remember he was over Potiphar's house, but he went to jail because God gave him the wisdom to interpret the dream. Now he's running things for Pharaoh in Egypt. And he was the one that organized all this. Well, the famine got so bad that even back in Israel, right, amongst Jacob's family, they were running out of food too. So where do you think they went to go get some food? What do you guys think? What do you think? Egypt. That's right, to get him off Joseph. So now they're going to Egypt. They don't realize they're coming to see Joseph. And there's a bit of a story there. I won't go into it all, but guess what happens when they come to Egypt? Do you remember Joseph's dream? They had to bow down to him and pay their respects, because now he was ruler in Egypt. So what's the story here? We'll end on this verse. Genesis 50, verse 20. Look at what he says here. Because remember, why did Joseph end up in Egypt? It was because his brothers sold him into slavery. Right? But in Egypt, he raised up. God gave him the wisdom for the dream. And then he saved Egypt from the 7 years of famine, and also was able to save Israel from the famine as well. And look at what he says here. This is the lesson for today. But as for you, ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring to pass, as it is this day, to save much people alive. So you see, sometimes we go through some hard times, some tough times. But God is sometimes preparing you, because maybe one day you can do a lot of good for a lot of people, just like Joseph. So today we've got a Bible craft. I hope you learned a little bit about Joseph there. Can you just get me the example that you made, Katerina? So today we've got a Bible craft to reflect on the story today of Joseph. And if you remember his dream at the beginning. So here's Joseph with his coat of many colors. And you remember his dream where he said, hey, we were binding sheaves in the field and your 11 sheaves bowed down to my sheaf, so we're going to stick these sheaves together and make them bow down to his sheaf. And then remember his second dream? What was that? Remember his second dream where he saw the sun and the moon and the 11 stars bow down to him. So we're going to do this activity to remind us this is the dream that he had and the story that it all went through until eventually it happened when he was in charge in Egypt. All right, let's get up and we'll go to the back, and Katerina's going to run it today.